There's a place in Indiana, quiet, almost forgotten, where time seems to slow down. An old railway bridge, suspended over a narrow creek. It creaks and groans when the wind shifts, as if it remembers something no one else dares to speak about. That's where two young girls, Liberty German and Abigail Williams, spent their last moments. A walk on a trail, a photograph, and a voice that still chills a nation years later. You've probably heard it. Down the hill. Two words that became one of the most haunting phrases in American true crime history. But before the world would hear those words, before a town would be shattered by an unimaginable loss, Libby and Abby were just two best friends on a day off from school, chasing adventure and laughter on an unassuming February afternoon. Tonight, we're going back, not just to the trail, but to everything that came before it. The people, the small town quiet, the warning signs that didn't look like warning signs at all. Because sometimes the truth doesn't hide in darkness. It hides in plain sight. If you care about stories like this, the kind that linger, that ask questions we still can't answer, you might want to stay close and maybe subscribe so you don't miss what's still unfolding. This is the Delphi murders. Delphi, Indiana. Population, just under 3,000. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and where news, good or bad, travels faster than you'd think possible. It sits quietly in Carroll County, surrounded by endless stretches of farmland and soft, rolling woods. The Monon High Bridge, once part of an abandoned railroad, became a quiet hiking spot, mostly known by locals. In 2017, this bridge wasn't a landmark. It was just a relic, a wooden skeleton of the past that stood over Deer Creek, carrying echoes of trains long gone. That February, it became something else entirely. Liberty German Libby was 14, a bright, athletic, fearless girl with a smile that could warm a cold room. Abigail Williams, Abby, was 13, soft-spoken, artistic, and thoughtful. Together, they balanced each other. Their friendship was simple, genuine, the kind of connection that defines those early teenage years. On February 13th, 2017, school was out. A makeup day turned into a rare break, perfect for hanging out, taking pictures, and enjoying the winter sun. Neither of them knew that the day would mark the beginning of one of the most haunting investigations in American true crime history. At around 1:30 p.m., Libby and Abby were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge trail by Libby's older sister, Kelsey. Kelsey would later recall that moment over and over again. The casual goodbye, the ordinary sound of the car door closing. Nothing about it felt final. The girls began their walk down the familiar path, a popular local spot where families and friends often came to hike. Libby, always the tech-savvy one, had her phone out. She loved documenting little moments, selfies, videos, photos for social media. At 2:07 p.m., she snapped a picture, Abby, standing on the bridge, balancing carefully on the old wooden planks, the sun falling gently on her hair. That image would become one of the last photographs she ever took. Moments later, something changed. At 2:13 p.m., Libby pressed record again, but this time, not for a photo. She began capturing video. The footage would later reveal a man walking toward them on the bridge. Heavy jacket, jeans, hands in pockets, head down. A stranger. In the video, you can hear him speak. A low, commanding voice. He says, "Down the hill." That short clip, less than a minute long, will become the cornerstone of the Delphi investigation, a chilling, cryptic clue that both revealed everything and nothing. When the girls didn't show up to meet Libby's father at the pickup spot later that afternoon, Concern turned quickly into panic. At first, everyone assumed they might have just lost track of time, maybe wander off the trail, maybe poor cell service. But by evening, when the sun dipped and the air grew cold, something felt wrong. Families began calling friends, neighbors, local volunteers. By nightfall, dozens of people were out with flashlights, searching the woods, calling their names. Libby, Abby. Those calls echoed through the trees long into the night. Search teams scoured the trail and surrounding area until late, but the terrain was rugged. The bridge itself stood nearly 70 feet above a creek, and dense brush made visibility difficult. By midnight, the official search was called off for safety reasons, to resume at first light. No one wanted to say it out loud, but by morning, hope had already started to thin. February 14th, 2017. Valentine's Day. Searchers gathered again at the trailhead. It was cold, overcast, quiet. Around noon, a volunteer discovered something near the creek, roughly half a mile from a bridge. 2 bodies. The girls were gone. Authorities sealed off the area immediately. The town of Delphi, small, tight-knit, peaceful, went into collective shock. Within hours, news spread across every major outlet in Indiana, and soon the country. The tragedy was unthinkable. But what came next, the mystery, the silence, the years of questions, would make Delphi one of the most haunting true crime stories of the modern era. Investigators had the video from Libby's phone. They had a voice, male, commanding. They had grainy still images of a man in a blue jacket and jeans. But what they didn't have was a name. The FBI, Indiana State Police, and Carroll County Sheriff's Office launched a massive joint investigation. Hundreds of tips poured in from across the country. The man in the photo became known as Bridge Guy. At first, authorities released only a single still frame. Then later, short audio. Down the hill. That phrase became a national obsession. Podcasts, message boards, online detectives. Everyone dissected it, slowed it down, reversed it, speculated about his tone, his accent, his intent. But behind the media noise were families, grieving privately. Kelsey German, Libby's sister, became an advocate for justice. She spoke publicly about her sister's bravery, for having the presence of mind to record the suspect. It was Libby's quick thinking that preserved the most critical evidence that, even years later, investigators still describe as key. But the mystery wasn't going to unravel easily, not in Delphi, because whoever was on that bridge seemed to know how to vanish. The days after the discovery felt endless. Businesses closed early. Parents watched their children more closely. Trust, that invisible fabric of small-town life, began to fray. For months, rumors spread like wildfire. Local men questioned. Vehicles searched. DNA samples taken. No arrests. No solid leads. Then came the sketches. The first composite sketch was released in July 2017. A middle-aged man with a goatee and a cap. But 2 years later, in 2019, investigators shocked the public by releasing a second sketch, this time a younger-looking man. 2 very different images. Speculation exploded. Had there been 2 suspects? Had the investigation shifted direction? Authorities clarified that the second sketch represented a new direction, but offered few details. It felt like a reset, a sign that investigators knew more than they could say. And through it all, one truth held steady. The video on Libby's phone, the man's image, the man's voice, was genuine. The killer had been right there, in front of them, for mere seconds. By late 2019, the Delphi case had generated over 40,000 tips, yet the investigation remained officially unsolved. Rumors pointed to local residents. Others suggested drifters, truckers, even connections to other crimes across state lines. The FBI maintained that the perpetrator likely had ties to Delphi, someone familiar with the trail system, confident enough to move quickly through the terrain. The theory that stood out most: the killer knew the area, and the girls may have recognized him. But without a confession or a definitive DNA match, the case grew colder with each passing year. Then, quietly, almost out of nowhere, a development in 2022 reignited the story. A man named Richard Allen, a local resident who had lived in Delphi for years, was arrested and charged with the murders of Libby and Abby. He worked at a local CVS. He'd even printed photos for one of the victims' families in the past. Shock rippled to the town again, not because he was an outsider, but because he wasn't. But that's a story that will unfold later. For now, we go back to the days after the tragedy, when the investigation was just beginning, and Delphi's quiet wood still whispered secrets. Because what happened after the discovery, the evidence, the suspects, the theories, would turn the Delphi case into one of the most complex and emotionally charged mysteries in modern true crime. 5 years. That's how long that voice would hang over Delphi, echoing through every interview, every sleepless night, every lead that promised an answer and vanished into the noise. The world heard that voice and thought, this should be easy. Technology can trace a sound. Someone must recognize him. Someone always does. But in Delphi, no one came forward with certainty. And the more investigators looked, the stranger the picture became. When investigators first recovered the audio from Libby German's phone, what they found was both haunting and incomplete. The clip that was publicly released, just 3 words, was part of a much longer recording. The rest of it, authorities have never shared in full. Only fragments are known to exist outside the case files, protected under strict evidence seals. It's believed that the recording captured more, maybe footsteps, maybe conversation, maybe things that no one wants to hear twice. But the portion we do know, that steady controlled voice saying, "Guys, down the hill," was chilling in its calmness. No panic, no shouting, just control. And that told investigators something important. The man wasn't impulsive. He was deliberate, confident enough to command in broad daylight with 2 victims and a phone recording inches away. That voice, experts would later say, carried a regional tone consistent with the Midwest. Ordinary, unremarkable. That was part of the horror. He didn't sound like a monster. He sounded familiar. In the days following the discovery of the girls, investigators conducted hundreds of interviews. Friends, family, neighbors, anyone who had seen someone on the trail that day. The key question was simple. Who was the man on the bridge? Witnesses reported seeing a figure dressed in blue jeans, a brownish jacket, and a cap, walking alone, heading in the same direction as the girls. One witness described him as kind of average, nothing that stood out. Another mentioned that he seemed out of place, but not enough to sound an alarm. That was the hardest part about the Delphi case. The suspect blended in so easily that he became invisible. Authorities began analyzing the short video clip frame by frame. Every movement, every pixel, every shadow. The still image released to the public showed the man mid-step, shoulders slightly hunched, his face partially obscured by a cap. To the untrained eye, it could have been anyone. Forensic analysts used voice analysis and gait recognition software to estimate his build, height, and age. likely between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 10 inches, weighed between 180 and 220 pounds. They compared the footage to known offenders in the region, to sex offender registries, to local work crews and contractors. But the more they compared, the more dead ends they found. In late February 2017, the FBI released a statement saying the suspect was likely hiding in plain sight. That phrase became a refrain in Delphi, whispered, repeated, debated, because in a town this small, plain sight could mean anywhere. July 17, 2017, 5 months after the murders, police released the first composite sketch. It showed a white male, roughly 40 to 50 years old, with a goatee and a cap. Strong jawline, heavy brow. Locals scanned the image, comparing it in their minds to people they'd seen at the grocery store, the gas station, the church pews. The phones at the sheriff's office started ringing almost immediately. Hundreds of tips, most of them false leads. But the sketch gave the case a face. And for many, that made the fear real for the first time. Parents started walking their kids to school again. Doors that had never been locked stayed bolted at night. Delphi was changing. And somewhere, if investigators were right, the man in that drawing was watching the news, seeing his own face, and staying very, very quiet. By 2018, the Delphi case had become an online phenomenon. True crime forums, podcasts, social media sleuths. Everyone wanted to solve it, and with every new theory came confusion. Some pointed to possible links with other crimes across the Midwest. A few connected it to a known predator who had operated in nearby states. Others believed it was personal, that the killer knew the girls. But authorities rarely commented on speculation. They insisted the investigation was active and the evidence was strong. Still, with no arrest, the silence started to feel like a wall. Even the families began to fear that justice might never come. Libby's grandfather once said in an interview, "We're not giving up. Someone out there knows something." Those words would become a mantra, repeated at vigils, on posters, on banners across town. Because in Delphi, hope had become both a comfort and a curse. April 22nd, 2019. 2 years after murders, the case suddenly shifts. At a packed press conference, Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter steps up to the microphone. He pauses for a long moment before speaking. "We believe you are hiding in plain sight. We believe this is about power and control. We believe you want to know what we know." Then the reveal, a brand new composite sketch. This time, it's not the older man the public had come to imagine. It's a much younger suspect. Late teens or early 20s, clean-shaven, with sharp features and tousled hair. The collective gasp that day could be felt through the entire town. 2 sketches. 2 faces. 1 crime. Authorities clarified that both sketches were valid, but represented different investigative perspectives. That only deepened confusion. Had the investigation gone backward, or had it finally broken open? No one knew, and the silence from law enforcement that followed was deafening. As the years went on, tips continued pouring in from all over the world. Letters, emails, even confessions. Most were hoaxes, but among them, investigators quietly tracked a few that stood out. Handwriting similar to previous threats in nearby counties. Phrases that seemed to reference details never made public. Were they from the killer, or from people desperate for attention? No one could be sure. At the same time, police were reanalyzing every piece of physical evidence. Fibers, soil samples, partial prints, digital traces from Libby's phone. Nothing led to a match. The killer had left almost no trace behind, as if he knew how to move unseen. Year after year, Delphi continued to gather. At the trailhead, near the bridge, people left flowers, crosses, ribbons. 2 wooden signs marked the entrance now, one for each girl. Their names became symbols of courage, of loss, of a community that refused to be forgotten. At every memorial, you could still hear it, a quiet defiance. We're still here. We're still waiting. The case grew cold, but it never froze, because beneath the surface, detectives were still working, quietly, methodically, waiting for the right moment to move. And in the fall of 2022, that moment finally came. A local man, a new lead, and the words probable cause. But before we get there, there's something important to understand. The psychology of control, of familiarity, of a killer who doesn't look like one. That's what investigators began piecing together. The kind of person who could command, deceive, and disappear, all in the span of minutes. And how, for years, no one suspected a thing. For 5 years, the question lingered in every conversation in Delphi. Who was he? Who was the man on the bridge? Thousands of tips, dozens of sketches, countless suspects. And then, one October morning in 2022, everything shifted. A quiet arrest. No chase. No warning. Just a name that would send shockwaves through the town. Richard Matthew Allen. A man who'd lived in Delphi for years. A man who'd worked behind a pharmacy counter, handing out photographs and prescriptions to the very people who'd been searching for the killer. He wasn't an outsider. He wasn't a stranger. He was homegrown. October 26, 2022, Carroll County, Indiana. News breaks slowly at first. A rumor whispered through text messages, then confirmed by reporters on scene. Police have made an arrest in connection with the Delphi murders. The name, Richard Allen, age 50. Residents struggled to place him. Some recognize him immediately. Others swear they'd seen him countless times, at the grocery store, at the local CVS where he worked as a pharmacy technician. No one suspected him. According to authorities, Allen had lived in Delphi for nearly 2 decades. He was married, had a daughter, no known criminal record. He'd lived less than 3 miles from a Monon High Bridge. When the warrant was served, Allen reportedly appeared calm. He didn't resist. He didn't speak much. To the community, it was almost too ordinary to believe. As reporters began digging into Allen's background, the first thing that stood out was proximity. He wasn't just from Delphi, he was of Delphi. He'd worked at the CVS for years, developing photographs, chatting with customers. He'd been a member of local clubs. He even interacted with the German family, the very people who'd lost Libby. In one chilling detail, Libby's grandmother revealed that Allen had once printed family photos for her. Photos of the girls. It was the kind of twist that true crime fiction wouldn't dare invent. But this wasn't fiction. Authorities filed 2 counts of murder against him, but withheld much of the evidence from public view under a sealed probable cause affidavit. When it was finally unsealed weeks later, the details painted a picture that was both compelling and frustratingly incomplete. The affidavit revealed that Allen had been on the Monon High Bridge trail the same day as Libby and Abby, February 13, 2017. He admitted this himself during a brief interview with investigators years earlier, saying he'd gone for a walk on the trail that afternoon. At the time, it seemed like a simple statement. No one followed up. But when investigators revisited his file in 2022, the details aligned too closely to ignore. Witnesses had seen a man matching his description near the bridge. One described him wearing jeans and a blue jacket, just like Bridge Guy. A bullet, or more precisely, an unspent .40 caliber round, had been found near the crime scene. Forensic testing linked it to a handgun registered to Richard Allen. Authorities claim it had been cycled through his gun, meaning it had been chambered and ejected, leaving distinctive markings that matched his firearm. It wasn't DNA. It wasn't video. But in a case this star for leads, it was enough to arrest. Still, many experts question the strength of the connection. Could an ejected round truly link someone so definitively, especially after 5 years? That question would hang heavily as the case moved toward trial. Delphi was stunned. For years, people had looked for an outsider, a stranger lurking in the woods, someone passing through town. But the reality was far more unsettling. The suspect had been there all along, familiar, polite, quiet. At the same CVS counter where people dropped off prescriptions and photographs stood a man who, if the allegations were true, had also walked the Monon Bridge on that cold February afternoon. Neighbors described him as reserved, friendly, and helpful. Nothing about him seemed unusual. But as the story spread, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Some residents recalled odd behavior, moments of unease, strange comments. Others remembered nothing out of the ordinary at all. In Delphi, everyone started to re-examine their own memories. To understand how it took 5 years to reach Richard Allen, you have to understand the complexity of the Delphi case. From the beginning, the investigation was massive. Dozens of agencies, thousands of tips, multiple sketches, shifting leads. In that volume of information, critical details often get buried. Allen's early statement that he'd been on the trail was logged, then lost in the shuffle. It took a new review of the case in 2022 for investigators to notice the correlation between his presence and other witness statements. When they searched his home, they found multiple firearms, including the .40 caliber handgun linked to the unspent round. They also seized computers, clothing, and other potential evidence. The warrant details remain largely sealed, and much of what was found has not been made public. But what investigators did say was simple. The evidence, both physical and circumstantial, pointed directly to Richard Allen. Almost immediately after the arrest, Allen's defense team pushed back. Hard. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial, the forensic link weak, and the investigation flawed. In public statements, they painted Allen as a normal man who had been swept into a narrative driven by desperation. Then, in October 2023, the case took another dramatic turn. A series of leaked documents, later confirmed as genuine, revealed that the defense was preparing to argue that the murders had ritualistic elements. They suggested that a group, not a lone individual, was responsible, a theory involving Odinist or pagan symbolism allegedly found near the crime scene. It was a claim that divided the public instantly. Some saw it as a wild, desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. Others wondered if the truth was even darker and stranger than anyone imagined. But law enforcement remained firm. They believed Richard Allen acted alone. And while the public argued over theories, Allen sat in solitary confinement, awaiting trial. Inside a small cell at Westville Correctional Facility, Richard Allen spends nearly 23 hours a day alone. No TV, limited contact. His defense claims he's deteriorating mentally and physically from isolation. They've filed motions arguing his rights are being violated. The court has denied most of them. Meanwhile, prosecutors maintain their case is solid, that Allen's admission to being on the trail, the ballistic evidence, and witness sightings form a clear timeline. Still, many details remain sealed, including portions of the crime scene description, the full audio from Libby's phone, and forensic reports. The result is a story half told, one that leaves everyone guessing, filling in the blanks with speculation. And perhaps that's the cruelest part of Delphi's story. Even when someone is charged, closure still feels miles away. Why now? Why, after 5 years, did the case suddenly connect back to Richard Allen? Was it new technology? A witness finally stepping forward? Or was it something else? A realization that the answers have been there all along, hidden in plain sight? What exactly happened on that trail between 2:07 and 3 p.m. on February 13th, 2017? What did the full recording capture? And why have investigators held so much back? Every mystery in Delphi points to one truth. Someone out there still knows more. 2 years after the murders of Libby, German and Abigail Williams, the case had gone quiet. Too quiet. Detectives still followed leads, but public updates became rare. Every few months, another interview, another plea for tips. But behind the scenes, the investigation never stopped. The man in the video, the one walking toward the girls, had a name. They just didn't know it yet. He wasn't a stranger in the shadows. He was part of Delphi. This is a story of how a killer hid in plain sight, and how the smallest cracks in an ordinary life began to reveal the truth. After 2017, Delphi tried to heal. Schools reopened. Churches filled again on Sundays. The trail reopened, carefully, quietly. But the bridge stood like a scar, weathered wood, rusted beams, a silent memorial to 2 lives lost. Every year, on February 13th, people gathered there. Candles, purple ribbons, flowers laid gently along the path. Their parents stood side by side, hearts broken but voices steady. "We will not give up," they said. "We will find who did this." The world moved on, but not Delphi, and not the families. Law enforcement maintained what they called an active investigation. Over 50,000 tips were reviewed, thousands of interviews conducted, a small war room filled with maps, digital timelines, and evidence boards that stretched across walls. Each detective carried the same haunting image in their minds, that still frame of Bridge Guy. He walked with his hands in his pockets, head slightly down, confident, but not hurried, as if he'd done this before. Audio experts tried isolating background sounds, birds, footsteps, even wind direction, to pinpoint exactly where the clip was taken. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit built a psychological profile. Male, local, familiar with the area, likely comfortable around young people. It was a net cast wide enough to cover half the county. But one thing stood out. Investigators believed he had attended community events, watched the coverage, and inserted himself into the narrative. He was watching them watch him. Between 2018 and 2021, Delphi became both fortress and fishbowl. Reporters roamed the town square. True crime podcasts set up shop, and amateur detectives flooded Reddit with theories. Some pointed to drifters passing through. Others accused local workers, even family members. The internet turned into a courtroom without walls. And through it all, police kept silent, releasing just enough to feed hope, but never enough to solve the puzzle. The case became a symbol of something larger, the collision between old-fashioned detective work and a new digital world obsessed with solving mysteries in real time. But as months stretched into years, the public grew restless. People started to ask, did the police really have anything? Behind closed doors, they did. They just couldn't prove it yet. By late 2021, investigators began re-examining old evidence with fresh eyes. Technology had advanced. DNA testing was more precise. Digital forensics could recover data once thought lost. And somewhere inside that mountain of files, a name began to repeat. Richard Allen. He was a 50-year-old CVS pharmacy technician who lived quietly in Delphi. Married, father, ordinary, the kind of man you'd nod to in the grocery aisle. He'd lived just a few miles from the Monon High Bridge for years. Never arrested, never suspected of anything serious. But when police revisited old tips, they discovered something odd. Richard Allen had actually come forward back in 2017. He told police he'd been on the trail the same day as the girls around the same time. He said he'd seen a few people taking a short walk and gone home. At the time, it seemed routine. But now, with everything they'd learned, that statement looked very different. In 2022, investigators quietly began to watch Allen's movements. They collected search warrants, reviewed his digital records, and examined his car. And then came the break. A gun, a 6-hour P226, registered to Richard Allen, was tested. Forensic examiners matched an unspent bullet found near the girls' bodies to that firearm. It wasn't a perfect DNA match, but the markings were unique enough to draw a line that had never been seen before. Investigators believe the gun had cycled through, chambered, but not fired at the crime scene. That meant whoever owned that weapon was there. That revelation changed everything. They revisited the 2017 interview transcript. Allen's story about being on the bridge that day no longer felt innocent. It felt incriminating. October 26, 2022, nearly 6 years after the murders. Police arrived at Richard Allen's modest brick home on Whiteman Drive. They searched for hours, boxes, bags, sealed evidence containers. Days later, he was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. The town of Delphi froze. After years of fear and speculation, the name of the alleged killer wasn't a stranger from far away. It was someone they'd pass in line at CVS. Someone who'd printed their photos. Someone who'd lived among them quietly all along. News cameras flooded the streets. Reporters asked neighbors what they thought. Many said the same thing. He was quiet, polite, never thought he could do something like this. Allen's wife stood by him. Friends were stunned. And Delphi, the town that had waited for years, now had a name to attach to the nightmare. But with that name came a new wave of uncertainty. Prosecutors released almost nothing. Court filings were sealed. The public, starved for answers, got none. And then came the strangest twist yet. The defense claimed that the girls had been killed in a ritual sacrifice by a cult. The court filings grew bizarre, filled with accusations and occult theories. But none of it changed the central question. Did Richard Allen kill Libby and Abby? In 2023, fragments of the probable cause affidavit were made public. Inside were the details investigators had guarded for 6 long years. The document revealed that multiple witnesses placed a man matching Allen's description on the trail that day. Libby's video, though short, captured his clothing consistent with what Allen admitted wearing. And the unspent bullet found near the girls' bodies was cycled through Allen's handgun. Still, there was no direct DNA match. No confession, just circumstantial evidence, and a haunting video that millions had seen. The defense called it coincidence. Prosecutors called it proof. And as both sides prepared for trial, Delphi once again found itself suspended between hope and horror. Years after that fateful February day, the Monon High Bridge still stands. Locals call it sacred ground, both haunted and hallowed. Visitors leave flowers. Some take quiet walks. Others stop halfway, close their eyes and listen to the wind, the water, and maybe the echoes of footsteps long gone. For Delphi, this isn't just a case. It's a wound that never fully heals. And for the families of Libby and Abby, justice isn't about vengeance. It's about closure, a promise kept, a truth uncovered. Leave your theory in the comments. If you found this deep dive illuminating or chilling, please subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future investigations. This is Echoes of the Unsolved, and together we venture into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and let the mountain keep whispering its secrets.